Hey guys, I made a teepee and campfire for a dollhouse. I figured they could be used for camping outside of the house or for the fireplace and bedroom. And here's what I did. First I made a 4" by 5" rectangle. Then I drew a triangle and cut it out. I cut 3/4 of an inch from the top. This template was for the 3 sides of the teepee. I also made a 1/4 of an inch wide strip. This was used for the seam allowance around all of the pieces. I traced the side template onto thin fabric 3 times with a seam allowance. Then I cut 1 inch from the top of the template and cut the bottom piece in half. This was for the front of the teepee. I traced those pieces onto fabric, adding the seam allowance. I made a 3/4 of an inch by 4.5" rectangle and traced it onto fabric with the seam allowance. I made 4 of these to wrap around the poles of the teepee. I folded along the line, folded it over again, and sewed it for the top and bottom of the 3 sides. For the front of the teepee, I folded and sewed the middle section first. Then sewed the bottom of the pieces. I sewed the top of the smaller piece, then connected the 3 pieces. I made a zigzag stitch along the edge so the fabric wouldn't fray. For the rectangle, I turned it around and folded the seam so the marks would be on the outside part of the fabric. Then I sewed the top and bottom of the rectangle. Next I needed to connect the pieces. I aligned the side piece with the front piece with the backs facing out. I folded a rectangle in half with the front facing out and aligned the edge between the 2 pieces, then sewed it. I repeated this with the other 2 side pieces. I aligned both pieces with the backs facing out, placed the folded rectangle pieces between them, and sewed them together. I trimmed the sides and cut around the ends. Then sewed a zigzag stitch. Turned the teepee inside out. I cut 4 dowels at 7 inches. I ironed along the sides of the teepee and added the dowels. Wrap them with string and the teepee is done. For the campfire, I used about a 1.5" by 1 3/4 of an inch piece of felt for the logs. I glued one end, rolled it, and glued the other end. I made 3 of these. I added a dot of glue to the ends of the logs and formed a triangle. Next I cut a flame shape out of gold felt. Then I cut a slightly bigger piece in orange and a larger piece in red. I made 2 gold, 2 orange, and 1 red piece. Then I glued them together. Glue the fire between the logs, and the campfire or fireplace is done.